When people think of war zones, the images that usually come to mind are those of soldiers in camouflage, tanks rumbling through ruined streets, and buildings reduced to piles of rubble. But there's a much deeper, more insidious reality that often goes unseen. A reality that touches the most mundane and familiar aspects of daily life. In Ukraine, the war has seeped into every corner, transforming even the simple act of boarding a train into a moment fraught with danger and uncertainty. For millions of Ukrainians, trains are not just a means of transportation. They are lifelines, connecting families, communities, and entire regions. They are places where children laugh, workers doze off after a long shift, and grandparents share stories with their grandchildren. Yet, in the shadow of war, these ordinary moments are shattered in an instant. Civilian trains, which should be sanctuaries of safety and routine, have become targets in a conflict that shows little regard for the boundaries between military and civilian life. The latest attack on a passenger train is a chilling reminder of how unpredictable and perilous life has become for those living in Ukraine. The images from the scene are burned into my memory, a stark, haunting testament to the vulnerability of everyday people caught in the crossfire of a relentless war. On Sunday, October 5th, as the sun rose over the battered landscape of eastern Ukraine, a Russian missile strike tore through a passenger train near the town of Balaklia. The attack was sudden, violent, and devastating, leaving behind a scene of chaos and heartbreak. The missile struck without warning, its impact echoing across the countryside and sending shockwaves through the hearts of those who rely on the railway for their daily lives. In an instant, what should have been a routine journey turned into a nightmare. The train in question was the Kharkiv-Kostiantynivka line, a route that has long been a vital artery for the region. Every day, it carries hundreds of passengers, students heading to school, workers commuting to their jobs, families visiting loved ones, and elderly residents seeking medical care. On that fateful morning, the train was filled with people simply trying to go about their lives, unaware that they were about to become the latest victims in a war that has upended the very fabric of Ukrainian society. The attack happened in broad daylight, under a sky that should have promised safety and normalcy. Instead, it was shattered by the deafening roar of the explosion. Ukrainian officials rushed to the scene, their faces etched with shock and sorrow as they took in the devastation. The ground was littered with debris, twisted metal, and the remnants of what had once been a symbol of connection and hope. For the officials and emergency responders, the scene was all too familiar, a grim reminder of the relentless toll the war is taking on their country. At least one person lost their life in the blast, their journey cut tragically short. The victim's identity has not yet been released, but their story is one that echoes the pain and loss felt by countless families across Ukraine. Each casualty is not just a statistic, but a human being with dreams, hopes, and loved ones left behind to grieve. More than 24 others were injured in the attack, some of them critically. Among the wounded were children, innocent bystanders whose lives have been forever altered by the violence that erupted without warning. Paramedics and volunteers worked frantically to tend to the injured, their hands moving quickly as they tried to stem the bleeding and offer comfort to those in shock. The cries of pain and fear mingled with the sounds of sirens and the distant rumble of artillery, creating a cacophony that spoke to the chaos of war. Families who had simply been traveling together were suddenly caught in a maelstrom of terror and confusion. Parents clung to their children, shielding them from the worst of the destruction, while others searched desperately for missing loved ones. The sense of safety that once accompanied a train ride was replaced by a profound sense of vulnerability and fear. Eyewitnesses described scenes of utter panic and confusion. Passengers who had been chatting quietly or gazing out the window moments before were now scrambling for their lives, their faces etched with disbelief and horror. Some described the sensation of the ground shaking beneath them, followed by a blinding flash and a wave of heat that knocked them from their seats. Thick, acrid smoke quickly filled the train carriages, making it nearly impossible to breathe or see. Shattered glass rained down as windows exploded from the force of the blast, cutting through the air and leaving passengers disoriented and injured. The once familiar interior of the train was transformed into a scene of chaos, with overturned seats, scattered belongings, and the ever-present threat of fire. In the midst of the confusion, passengers scrambled to escape the wreckage. Some carried loved ones in their arms, their faces streaked with blood and soot, while others desperately searched for help amid the chaos. The sense of community that had once defined the train was replaced by a primal instinct to survive, as people navigated the twisted metal and debris in search of safety. Video footage from the aftermath paints a grim and haunting picture. Train cars twisted and destroyed, their metal frames torn apart by the force of the explosion. Personal belongings, suitcases, toys, books, and clothing were scattered across the tracks, silent witnesses to the lives that had been so violently disrupted. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of burning, a stark reminder of the destructive power unleashed in an instant. A massive crater gaped beside the railway, a testament to the sheer force of the missile's impact. The ground was scorched and torn, the tracks twisted and unusable. Emergency crews, risking their own safety, rushed to the scene, their determination evident as they navigated the dangerous terrain to reach the injured. For many of these responders, this was not their first time witnessing such devastation, but the pain and urgency never diminish. Paramedics and rescue teams worked tirelessly, pulling survivors from the wreckage and providing first aid on the spot. Their quick response undoubtedly saved lives, but the psychological scars left by the attack will linger for everyone involved. The trauma of witnessing such violence, of losing friends and family, and of narrowly escaping death, is something that will haunt these survivors for years to come. Sadly, this was not an isolated incident. Attacks on Ukraine's railways have become alarmingly frequent, turning what was once a symbol of progress and unity into a target for destruction. Each new strike chips away at the sense of normalcy that Ukrainians have fought so hard to maintain. The strike near Balaklia is just one example of a broader, intensified Russian campaign targeting Ukraine's railways. Over the past year, there has been a marked increase in attacks on transportation infrastructure, with dozens of trains, stations, and rail lines coming under fire. These attacks are not isolated acts of violence. They are part of a calculated effort to disrupt the flow of people and goods, to sow fear and uncertainty, and to undermine the resilience of the Ukrainian people. These attacks are not random or accidental. They are part of a deliberate strategy to cripple Ukraine's vital infrastructure and weaken its ability to function as a nation. Railways are the arteries that keep the country alive, transporting not just people, but also food, medicine, fuel, and other essential supplies. By targeting these lifelines, Russian forces hope to create chaos, disrupt daily life, and erode the will of the Ukrainian people to resist. The importance of Ukraine's railways cannot be overstated. In a country as vast and diverse as Ukraine, trains are often the only reliable means of transportation, especially in regions where roads have been destroyed or are too dangerous to travel. They connect remote villages to major cities, deliver humanitarian aid to those in need, and provide a sense of continuity in a world turned upside down by war. Disrupting the railways means disrupting the very fabric of society, making it harder for people to access food, medical care, and other necessities. Just days before the Balaklia attack, another missile struck a train near Chernihiv, causing widespread destruction and further highlighting the vulnerability of Ukraine's transportation network. In that attack, several carriages were destroyed and dozens of passengers were injured. The blast also damaged nearby power lines, plunging entire neighborhoods into darkness and cutting off electricity to hospitals, schools, and homes. The ripple effects of these attacks are felt far beyond the immediate blast zone. When power lines are destroyed, entire communities are left without electricity, heat, or running water. Hospitals are forced to operate on backup generators, schools are closed, and families are left to huddle in the dark, wondering when, or if, life will return to normal. The psychological impact of living under constant threat cannot be overstated. Every siren, every distant explosion is a reminder that safety is never guaranteed. Ukrainian authorities have strongly condemned these strikes, calling them blatant violations of international law and deliberate acts of terror against civilian infrastructure. In press conferences and public statements, officials have vowed to hold those responsible accountable and to do everything in their power to protect the country's vital transportation networks. These attacks are not just military actions, they are calculated attempts to spread fear, disrupt daily routines, and break the spirit of the Ukrainian people. By targeting trains, Russia is sending a message: nowhere is safe, and no one is beyond the reach of violence. But the resilience of the Ukrainian people is remarkable. In the face of unimaginable hardship, they continue to rebuild, to support one another, and to refuse to be cowed by terror. The destruction of civilian infrastructure has far-reaching consequences. It disrupts the rhythms of daily life, making it harder for people to work, study, and care for their families. It forces communities to adapt to new realities, to find new ways of surviving in a world where the old certainties no longer apply. And it leaves deep scars, both physical and emotional, that will take years, if not decades, to heal. As the conflict escalates, the risk to civilians, especially those simply trying to go about their daily lives, remains dangerously high. Every train journey, every trip to the market, every walk to school is now shadowed by the possibility of violence. The world must not look away. Every attack on a train, every shattered window, every life lost or changed forever is a stark reminder of the urgent need for peace and the protection of civilians. The international community has a responsibility to bear witness, to demand accountability, and to support those who are suffering. It is not enough to simply report the facts. We must also remember the human stories behind the headlines, the families torn apart, the children traumatized, the communities struggling to rebuild. In times of crisis, staying informed is more important than ever. The situation in Ukraine is constantly evolving, with new developments unfolding every day. By subscribing to reliable news sources, you can ensure that you have access to the latest updates, in-depth analysis, and on-the-ground reporting. Your support helps journalists continue their vital work, shining a light on the realities of war and giving a voice to those who might otherwise go unheard. As this story continues to unfold, we will be here to bring you the facts, the context, and the human stories that matter most. Stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never forget the power of solidarity in the face of adversity. The people of Ukraine are counting on the world to stand with them, to bear witness, to speak out, and to demand a future where trains are once again symbols of hope, not targets of war.